Well, thanks for staying with us. The other story now. The U.S. accuses Qatar of supporting terrorism and then turns around and sells F-15 fighters to the same country and continues to use the Al Udeid air base. Clearly, politics is all very well, but nothing can hold the business of America.
America's giant Al Udeid air base in Qatar is a mini military city about 17 miles from the capital city of Doha. With 10,000 U.S. military personnel, 120 aircraft of all kinds, including fighters and bombers, Al Udeid is the home of the U.S. Combined Operations Center, which controls U.S. and allied air power in the region, especially airstrikes over Islamic states that target in Syria and Iraq. Given that it's a little odd how U.S. President Donald Trump saw fit to accuse Qatar of terrorism, quote, "The nation of Qatar, unfortunately, has historically been a funder of terrorism at a very high level," end quote. And then a few days later, Trump's government announced plans to sell $12 billion worth of F-15 fighters to Qatar. Well, it's not clear if this figure is over and above the Obama administration's approval of the sale of 72 F-15 jets, cost of a little more than $21 billion to Qatar. U.S. Defense Secretary James Mattis tried his best to explain the contradiction of selling weapons to a country the U.S. had accused of backing terrorism.
I would simply point out that we have interoperability capability with Qatar, and I believe that Prince Thani inherited a difficult, very tough situation, and he's trying to turn the society in the right direction. But we all agree that funding of any kind of terrorist group is inimical to all of our interests, and I believe that it's moving in the right direction. We've got to try and help sort this out with them all.
The Qataris were, of course, delighted. Quote, "This is, of course, proof that U.S. institutions are with us, but we have never doubted that. Our militaries are like brothers. America's support for Qatar is deep-rooted and not easily influenced by political changes," end quote. Clearly, for Donald Trump, the prospect of making good on his campaign commitment to boost the U.S. job markets, not to mention the profits for aircraft maker Boeing, won the argument. The same motivation must have driven the Obama administration's decision to sell 120 Boeing-built passenger aircraft to arch-enemy Iran. The current administration is now going through the motions of reviewing the deal.
I believe Iran's actions speak louder than anyone's words, and they are going to incite the international community in that region to try to block them in the various destabilizing efforts they are undertaking right now, from Syria, where Assad remains in power today because of Iran's actions, to Yemen, where they have been contributing in an unhelpful way to a war that is marooning millions of people and leaving them vulnerable to starvation and health problems and violence.
Boeing says it will abide by whatever decision the government comes to, but it's important to understand that money talks in Washington, and nobody can accuse the Trump administration of not being business-friendly. Bureau Report, WION.
So we have to talk about what's happening as far as Qatar's dealings with the United States and other countries go. But in this case, we talk about this F-15 jet deal. Ambassador Anil Trigunayat joins me live from New Delhi. He is the former ambassador of India to Jordan, Libya, and even Malta. Thank you, Ambassador, so much for joining us. Now, the U.S. on the one hand accuses Qatar of supporting terrorism and then turns around and sells F-15 fighter jets to the same country and also continues to use the Al Udeid air base. How do you see this double game, or do you see this as very much in line with what Trump says, America first, the U.S.'s policy right now?
Well, it is clear-cut a case of business. As we know, the arms lobby is extremely strong in the United States. And from California to Connecticut, this is the arms lobby all the way. When Trump visited Saudi Arabia, there he backed a deal for $110 billion there. And now this is another $12 billion, which appears to be part of the deal that was signed during in November 2016 during Obama's time. And they have one of the largest bases and the regional headquarters in Doha in Qatar. And it was shifted, as you know, from Saudi Arabia to Qatar in the wake of 9/11. And therefore, it is extremely important. They have very close relations. They cannot do without Qatar being on their side in the war against terrorism and for their regional outreach, whether it is Syria, whether it is Iraq, or fight against the ISIS. And therefore, for the Americans, it is very clearly to subserve the interests, their own interests and the interests of their defense industry.
Right, Ambassador, as you also pointed out during the Obama era, what the policy of the United States was we saw the Boeing deal at that time as well. But if what you're saying, it's all about business as usual, then what does diplomatic isolation mean for Qatar at this point in time? If it still continues to enjoy this kind of a status with the United States now?
Well, the problem is that the United States has been sending mixed signals. President Trump said something else in the beginning, then he changed his tone, then his Pentagon says something, and then his Foreign Minister Rex Tillerson says something else. And therefore, there is a tremendous confusion, which is not good for the region or for the world peace and the stability and the security. As a superpower, as a hyperpower, it is incumbent upon the United States to stabilize the problems that have happened. And none of the sides should think that just because the Americans are talking nicely to them or are their own side, that they can take advantage. It has been highly disconcerting that past 3 weeks, the kind of isolation, kind of siege of Qatar by major countries in the region has been done, which is unseen before.
Right.
And this has to end because GCC is very strong.
Right. In fact, this is, one of the biggest crisis in the Persian Gulf, as we understand. Lots more to talk about, Ambassador. Do stay with me. Let's take a look at the financial status of Qatar. Well, its aircrafts, very expensive, and it is also expensive to maintain them. Add to that the flying costs and training and salaries of pilots, engineers and technicians. So how does Qatar afford it all? Qatar's wealth is based on the export of crude oil and liquefied natural gas, or LNG. It is the world's largest producer of LNG, producing 42 million metric tons. And its crude oil reserves are estimated at over 20 billion barrels. The average per capita income there is $100,000, making it the world's richest people. The annual defense budget there, nearly $2 billion. Now, since Qatar is a monarchy with the king's word final, he has the flexibility to decide on budgets, how much to spend, and on what to spend that money. With so much oil and gas wealth, Qatar finds it easy, even in these days of low oil and gas prices, to afford expensive weapons. But that's not it. Qatar has the money. It can buy whatever it wants. So what does tiny Qatar do with so many fighter jets? It's a good question, since this country's total population is 2.2 million. Indians working in Qatar are more than 6 lakh. While Qatar's armed forces number just 11,800 men, of which the army is the biggest, those numbers 8,500. The Navy has 1,800 personnel and the Air Force 1,500. Currently, the Air Force operates about 90 aircraft of all kinds, in addition to the recently ordered F-15s from the US. Qatar has also ordered 24 Rafale fighter aircrafts from France and over 40 helicopter gunships. The point is whether it has enough pilots to fly them. Ambassador, isn't that interesting? What will Qatar do with so many fighter jets? Agreed, it's got the money, it's got the highest GDP, its people are rich, but then what's the plan?
Well, as you know that now you have seen what has happened in the recent siege. In 2014 also we have seen the break of the diplomatic relations. Now every country has to decide on what kind of what level of security it is comfortable with, what can assure some kind of it can protect it. And I think that it is for the Qataris to decide. They can of course afford it. They have the money. Plus these fighter planes and the firepower is being used along with the Americans to fight against in Syria or against the ISIS or some other places. They are taking sorties, they are bombing those places, so they are being used everywhere. And very often they don't have their own pilots, so they are all taking, all the Gulf countries actually get the pilots from other countries as well.
All right, Ambassador, lots more to talk about. A very quick word on what do you think this deal means for America's war on terrorism? It's business as usual, but then they are seen supporting, doing business with a country like Qatar, who has been diplomatically isolated by, several of its own neighbors.
You see, I would like to say one thing. I have been posted to Libya, and there I have seen all the countries, including the US and other Western countries on the one side, and all the Gulf countries, including all these 4 major countries which are currently in this fracas, who have been siding with one group or the other, and the mess they have created in those countries.
Right.
Same thing is happening in Syria. So I would like to say that none of the countries is above board in this. And as we always maintain that you can only fight the terrorism when the whole world, international community, takes the one stand and define the terrorism as one. So therefore, accusing one country like Qatar that it is only supporting terrorism is not correct in my opinion.
Okay, well said, Ambassador Anil Trigunayat. I request you to please stay on with me. A couple of other interesting reports coming up. Well, they're tripping over themselves for the photo opportunity, a 3-way handshake for peace. Ever since Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE and Egypt cut off ties abruptly with Qatar, claiming it's sponsors of terrorism, several nations have offered to mediate between the feuding Gulf states. But it's the unlikeliest lineup who they are, and do they really qualify to smoke shishas of peace in the Gulf? Senior foreign editor for WION, Padma Rao, has the story.
Ever since Gulf states Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE and the North African country Egypt shut their doors to the richest oil nation on earth, Qatar, alleging that it supports terrorism, a motley crew of global players are daring to the Gulf to mediate. But how qualified are these peacemakers whose hearts seemingly hemorrhage for Gulf unity? Interlocutors or more like circling vultures? Take Kuwait. WikiLeaks cables have referred to Kuwait as the source of funds and a key transit point for Al-Qaeda and other terror groups. Kuwait has swooped down against activities on its own soil, but shown little concern against Kuwaiti funders and terror mediators outside its own territory. The United States designated the Revival of Islamic Heritage Society, a so-called charity, a terrorist group because it funded the Al-Qaeda and also the Lashkar-e-Taiba, whose favorite target is India. Kuwait hasn't blinked, and yet Kuwait sees itself as the ideal intermediary to lead errant Qatar back into the fold of the righteous. Since the day he entered office, France's President Emmanuel Macron has made it obvious that he intends to position France as the one European counter to the mighty United States in the global arena. He's now walking the talk by arriving in Morocco to forge a North African coalition with the goal of uniting the squabbling Gulf states. But who divided and ruled and plundered much of North Africa, particularly Morocco, Tunisia and Algeria? Mais bien sûr, it was France, of course. An honest broker? Far from it. That US President Donald J. Trump gave old ally Saudi Arabia $110 billion and old ally Qatar 36 F-15 jets worth $12 billion respectively is no secret. Small inconvenience that Saudi is not on talking terms with Qatar. From anti-Assad rebels, today the Islamic State, to anti-Soviet rebels who later matured into the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda, the list of terrorists backed by the United States is too long to accommodate in anything less than a comprehensive encyclopedia. The United States offering hookahs of peace in the Qatar crisis? Yeah, right. But for India, the mother of all surprises is Pakistan's offer of itself as an honest broker in the Qatar crisis. Yes, Pakistan, in whose army cantonment international terrorist Osama bin Laden watched TV while his wives chatted with vegetable vendors at the front door. Pakistan, which arms, supports, trains and infiltrates terror groups Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi into India and Afghanistan. Pakistan, which was supported by many Gulf states in its 26/11 terror attack in Mumbai. Pakistan as middleman, as credible as the sun rising in the west tomorrow. Padma Rao, WION.
Ambassador Trigunayat, how do you see countries like Kuwait, which itself has been tainted by allegations of giving support to Al-Qaeda, offering to mediate, Russia, which is heavily involved in Syria, or for that matter, France, which is still involved with its former North African colonies? How do you see these offers, these countries wanting to come and help Qatar in sorting out its problems?
You see, as far as Kuwait is concerned, I have earlier said that most of these countries, one way or the other, have been associated with one group or the other and have been accused of harboring some extremist elements one way or the other.
That's
this
right.
This is a pattern which is seen everywhere, and that is why singling out Qatar was not really, in my view, a very fair thing to do. On the other hand, as far as Kuwait is concerned, it's part of the GCC. Now they want to resolve this issue within the GCC, and that is why it is important that there are only two other countries that are left, that is Kuwait and Oman.
Right.
They are the only two which can have some kind of a sane voice and have a one-on-one.
But can they be really honest in their approach, all
these?
these countries?
Well, at least Kuwait and Oman can be impartial in this.
Okay. All right,
I can't
Ambassador.
say the honest brokers, because nobody is honest in today.
Well, you think later on maybe Qatar would accept mediation by big brother United States? Because whatever said and done, it is ultimately Qatar's call to see what help will or does it want to accept.
Well, as far as I know, reports I have seen, Qatar is still waiting for the exact demands of the other four countries. Exactly what do they want? Now, they have prepared a list of some 50 odd people. I'm sure every other country can produce 40 more, where you may find some implications of the other. But at the end of the day, I think both sides have to come down of the high tree that they are sitting on, and they'll have to adjust the reality and live together in GCC, because it's a very strong organization. Any destabilization in the region will be very dangerous for global peace and security and stability. So I hope that this will not escalate further.
All right. Ambassador Trigunayat, and very quickly, I'd like to take your views on whether, India should emerge as a mediator now. Is it time for India? Because it's been neutral in its position. Do you think that is something that could work for India? It's time for India to now start stepping up and start looking into what's happening world over. Do you think it's the right time, or maybe not? It should continue with its cautious approach and be neutral in most of the subject matter.
Well, as you know that we have more than 8 million Indians living in Middle East, especially in the GCC countries.
Right.
More than 60% of our oil and gas comes from there. We get huge remittances from there. We have extremely good relations with every single country in the Middle East now, especially since the Link West policy of Prime Minister Modi, where he has gone around all over and had developed this relationship and great warmth with the leadership in all the countries. Now, if India is called upon to do so and becomes an honest broker for peace, I think we should go ahead and do it. But at the same time, we should not unnecessarily intervene where you are not required. Today, there are too many people, like the Americans, the French, the others, Moroccans. They are trying to do some kind of a mediation. But I hope and sincerely feel that it is for the GCC to sort out their house in order.
All right, Ambassador Trigunayat, do stay on with us. Well, we have to take a look how many have tried and most have failed. The ongoing Qatar crisis has sparked off a host of eager offers to mediate between the warring Gulf states. We've talked about this. India's emergence as a global player is attracting invitations for New Delhi to take a lead and sort out some brutal conflicts raging in the world. Here's a report.
There's a certain glamour to being in the middle of the photo op, the hearty three-way handshake, and it's a tried and tested method for many countries with ambitions of positioning themselves as the masters of the universe. From the gigantic and powerful United States to the rich, quiet and tiny Norway, many countries have ventured where angels fear to tread, in the crossfire between other warring countries. US President Carter held hands with Egypt's Anwar Sadat and Israel's Menachem Begin. Bill Clinton beamed on as Israel's Yitzhak Rabin and PLO chairman Yasser Arafat gingerly shook hands. Norway's peace envoy, Erik Solheim, smiled into cameras each time he posed with Colombo officials and the separatist Liberation Tigers in Sri Lanka. However, most attempts have failed, with analysts pointing out that it is because they had stakes of varying kinds in the conflicts themselves. But what about emerging superpower India? Could India's renowned neutrality position it as the ideal peacemaker, say in Syria or in the Qatar crisis, or between its important strategic partner Israel and old friend Palestine? Take a look at two recent invitations conveyed through exclusive conversations with WION.
First of all, if I want to talk about the political part, the most important factor for any player to play any role in such a complicated conflict is to have credibility. And India, through the history, has always been credible. Through the different parties that took power in India, we never noted that there's any fluctuation in their policy because it's based on morals and ethics, as I said. So this credibility is a very important factor for India to play a role, not necessarily within Syria, because the Syrian conflict is not only Syrian.
Right.
The main factors are regional and international. And the most important part of this, that how can we protect the international law?
India has no vested interests in the Syrian conflict, nor has it taken sides even with Syria. So why the offer from Damascus? Perhaps Palestinian legislator Hanan Ashrawi's forthcoming interview to WION holds a clue.
And we think there's a role for India. We were talking about a formulation of P5+1+. We don't like the quartet formulation because it doesn't work. It hasn't worked, and it has become an instrument of American power.
India has aimed to maintain good relations with all countries it has diplomatic ties with, a policy New Delhi will almost certainly adhere to, even as it increasingly takes center stage in the global arena. In contentious voting, India has abstained and often turned an icy shoulder to superpower demands that it bend in the one direction or another. All the religions of the world are represented in India, as are various global ethnic groups. It has been a scrupulous contributor to international peacekeeping operations. Atithi Devo Bhava, the guest is God, runs an ancient Sanskrit motto. But India's Foreign Office has refused to crash parties and certainly doesn't appreciate uninvited guests on its own sovereign territory. Will New Delhi accept to step in the Middle East? Unlikely. But just being asked is a heartening sign that the world's largest democracy has arrived. Padma Rao, WION.
All right, with that, Ambassador Trigunaya, thanks so much for joining us this evening on Gravitas. Time to end this edition, leaving you with this image. This is no ordinary citizen. He is Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria. In the eyes of America, Assad is a war criminal and a security threat to the US and its allies in West Asia. Assad is also a target of Daesh, or the so-called Islamic State, and other terrorist groups such as Jabhat al-Nusra.